Monday, August 17th, and I call to order this regular meeting of the Richfield School Board. Attending this evening's board meeting are board members Paula Cole, Peter Tensing, Allegra Smishek, Christine Malik, Tim Paulus, and I am Crystal Brackey. We are also joined by Superintendent Unowski and several district staff members here in the room who you will likely hear from later in the agenda. Richfield Public Schools' mission statement is that we strive to inspire and empower each individual to learn, grow, and excel. And that is certainly especially important for us to keep at the center of our meeting, given the magnitude of decisions before us and our community as it relates to the 2020-2021 school year. We want to welcome those of you watching this meeting live or in the future via YouTube. Thank you for being with us. You will probably see that as a board, we are meeting in person this evening for the first time since mid-March, and we are practicing social distancing in this room and complying with the statewide mask order. Though the executive order allows for the removal of masks while speaking during public meetings subject to open meeting law, such as this one, I am going to continue wearing my mask and encourage others to do the same. If you are watching, please consider utilizing the closed caption button in the lower right-hand corner of YouTube if that makes it easier to follow our conversation after the fact. So with that, our first item of business this evening is to approve the agenda before us. As approval of the agenda is a routine business item, I will just briefly pause to see if there are any comments or questions related to the agenda. Seeing and hearing none, is anyone prepared to move the agenda as presented?
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Ms. Cole and a second by Mr. Paulus. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The chair votes aye, and the agenda is approved. And we have successfully done our first in-person vote in about 5 months. So excuse us as we all get used to being back in person and doing this live instead of via Google Meet. So we now move into the information and proposals non-action items section of the agenda. We begin this evening with time for public comment, and I am pleased that we have 5 members of our community who have requested time to speak at this evening's meeting. Before our first comment, I want to provide a brief overview of our guidelines. As outlined in Board Policy 216, we welcome comments from members of the public. We ask that you ensure your comments are consistent with our policy, especially around protecting the privacy rights of individual students and staff members. Members of the public have 3 minutes to speak unless translation is required, in which case 6 minutes are provided. We have both virtual and in-person ways for members of the community to participate in public comment, which we hope encourages participation in whatever way feels safe and accessible for community members. Thank you in advance for sharing your thoughts with us, and know that even though we will not be responding in the moment this evening, that we take your comments very seriously, and you may receive follow-up from us or from a member of the staff. So we have, as I said, 5 public comments. We will go through them in the order in which the request was received, and I would just like to apologize in advance for any name mispronunciations that I or others do. So our first comment was submitted via video from Corey Cochran.
Hi everyone, my name is Corey Cochran and I teach 8th grade Global Studies at RMS, and I'm speaking today to share some thoughts and comments and concerns that I have with regards to the fall plan. The first one that I want to share has to do with the planning process and how the survey data was used to inform making this decision around the hybrid approach. I experienced the survey in terms of the data collecting mechanism as being already decided that we were going to be doing a hybrid model in the fall, which to me was not representative of what our actual options are. And so it felt as if we were already down the path of hybrid model without really considering distance learning. And so that's concerning to me from a decision-making standpoint, from a sort of democratic processes standpoint of how that decision was made and the why behind it, especially if that data is going to be utilized to justify certain approaches when not all options were fully on the table to begin with. I'm also concerned about what we're going to do when teachers get sick. To me, it's not a question of if they get sick, it's a question of when. And I did appreciate seeing in the board packet information about the guaranteed 14 days. However, I did not see a plan that addressed coverage and what we're going to do for those students when a teacher needs to be gone. Will their coworkers be expected to cover for them? It's already been incredibly hard to be gone as a teacher in the district. We want to be there for our students. We want that consistency, and it has been very hard to find subs. So how is that going to be addressed in even harder circumstances, even more stressful circumstances? Similarly, with that continuity and consistency piece, we talk a lot about, as educators, the need for clear expectations and consistency for our students in our classrooms and setting up our classroom environments. And I worry that we are putting in a lot of work to design a model for one day in person for secondary students, and what happens a month from now if we have to go to distance learning, it breaks the continuity, and how it would be prudent of us to start from a more conservative place and provide that consistency and time to plan for our families and students, so that we can rely on this sort of, standard model throughout the year. And if things improve, which hopefully they do, we can really focus on upping that socialization and social piece, which we know is important. I just want to note a couple pieces of research and evidence that I'm seeing that really do suggest we need to be taking a more conservative approach right now. This op-ed from the New York Times really suggests that we need to be at a place where the spread is less than one new case per 100,000 people per day, which unfortunately Hennepin County is not. In the last couple days, this research from Harvard was published in the New York Times, also giving sort of county by county data on whether or not a county has the capacity to reopen schools, given new caseload information, positive test rates, and then also healthcare capacity. And Hennepin County is in pink, which means it's, according to this study, is not ready to reopen. So again, going back to the why behind hybrid learning, I would like to know more about that rationale, considering this strong sort of evidence that's indicating we need to take a more conservative approach. And the last thing that I want to share with regards to the why behind why distance learning makes sense to me is the impact we're seeing on Black and Brown communities. And we know that Black and Brown communities are bearing the brunt of COVID-19 far more so than white members of the community. And so if we think about this as a risk decision and participating in that risk, how are we justifying that as part of our racial equity lens that we're trying to bring to this work? So again, thank you for your time and your commitment to Richfield, and I look forward to seeing where this conversation goes. Thank you.
Okay. Our second comment this evening is a written statement from Darcy Immerfall that will be read by Board Member Tim Paulus.
Good evening. My concerns are specifically regarding the schedule of 2 days in person, 3 days distance learning per week for 3rd through 5th graders. Academic, social, emotional concerns for students in grades 3 through 5. As a mom of 3 young children and as a 6th grade reading teacher, I have a tremendous appreciation for the work of elementary teachers. They are teaching our youngest learners the building blocks, both academic and soft skills, that they will need for the rest of their lives in and out of school. It is unreasonable to expect that students in grades 3 through 5 will self-direct and stay on task while distance learning 3 days per week without the resources, support, and physical presence of their teacher. Not only are our students learning from their teachers, they're learning essential skills like conflict resolution, empathy, cooperation, and communication from their peers. It is discouraging to me that this will be a scarcity with the current proposal of 3rd through 5th graders being in school only 2 days per week. Equity concerns. As educators, we are continuously evaluating and improving our teaching strategies and communication to ensure that we're reaching all of our students. In a time where we are trying to break down the walls of systemic racism, provide more opportunity, in addition to closing the achievement gap, it is counterintuitive to deny educational access to any of our students. The proposed plan for 3rd through 5th grade students not only perpetuates educational inequality, it may also cause significant challenges for families who don't have the job flexibility to teach their children from home 3 days per week. The proposed schedule will also be problematic for families who have a child in K-2 and a child in grades 3 through 5. Instructional care questions and concerns. The email to parents sent on August 13th made references to instructional care for children of Tier 1 workers, yet included no details. Where is the instructional care coming from? When I received an email from Richfield Fun Club on August 14th, there was no mention of instructional support. Our Fun Club staff expected to teach our students. It is my understanding that Fun Club is not directly connected to RPS. If they are expected to teach our students, have they been made aware of that? Will they be able to facilitate the synchronous learning components of the hybrid model? What are the options for people who are not Tier 1 workers but still need care for their children? For many parents who are unable to work from home, the cost of care for their children 3 days per week could cause financial crisis for the family. Thanks again for your consideration.
Our next comment is from Lori Humiston. It is also a written comment that will be read by Christine Malik.
I would like to request an addition to the requirements for student-athlete participation in sport in Richfield Public Schools. Temperature checks logged prior to entry to the team environment, the pool, the ball field, etc. This was done this summer during St. Louis Park Synchro Swim Summer Club. We are also doing this prior to entry to vulnerable patients at my workplace. It doesn't take long and has been effective at early identification of otherwise non-symptomatic people. This is especially effective when a log is kept. It enables the ability to follow someone who runs cool, like me, with an average of 96.5 to 97 degrees, who then could pop up to 99 to 100 degree temp. If prior readings aren't logged, the 3-degree jump in temperature may be missed or written off as a slight change from an assumed normal temperature of 98.6. You could compare this with a 3-degree jump assumed for an assumed normal 98.6 to 101.6, which would be enough to necessitate a test to be completed. Thank you for allowing me this written comment.
And our next comment is from Douglas Kleist, who is here with us in person and is making his way up to the microphone. I think you still need to turn it on. Oh, great. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, there you go.
My name.
It may be working.
Yeah. Scott,
Yeah.
can you hear it?
I can hear it.
Yeah. My name is. Well, is it working? Kind of.
Yeah.
We'll wait just a moment.
Yeah.
And as this is a good opportunity to share. We are in the new district boardroom for the first time, so we are also working through technology for the first time. So thank you for bearing with us. That one's working.
All right. My name is Doug Kleiss, Richfield class of 1980, and I live with my wife Julie, also Richfield class of 80 at our family at 6745 Lakeview. I'm here tonight for our daughter, a senior at Richfield High School. I felt it was the least I could do for her to be here tonight to convey our family's thoughts on the hybrid model for 6th through 12th graders being presented as part of the agenda item tonight for fall planning update. As we all know, over 2 weeks ago, families were requested to complete a survey about back-to-school options. And the survey stated at the beginning that students, if not choosing a distance learning model, would be able to be going back to school using a hybrid model. And the hybrid models presented to us, and for which we selected our choices, all indicated that students would be in school at least 2 days. Our family was happy with a minimum 2-day-a-week model as presented in the options. But to our surprise, within a week of the survey being completed, families were sent an email with a hybrid model for 6th to 12th graders of 1 day a week that was not presented to us in the survey and essentially lacks any in-school academic course instruction. We are dismayed and very disappointed in this model, especially since it wasn't one of the choices on the family survey. In reading through the presentation, emails, and board documentation, the chart on page 18 of the planning presentation shows 66% of the families wanted their high schoolers and 60% of the families wanted their middle schoolers back in school. The chart on page 23 shows that nearly 51% of the high school staff and 62% of the middle school staff wanted to distance learn or instruct. In an email dated 8/14 explaining the administration's reasoning behind the hybrid model being presented, the fourth bullet points of the items taken into consideration when creating the hybrid model states that staff preferences in allowing teachers who prefer distance learning the opportunity to continue this model of instruction. Also, the teams listed on page 4 of the presentation look to be made up of just staff and administration. Along with these items and what is stated in the last paragraph of the hybrid model section in the 8/14 email, it appears that staff choices were considered above those of the students and families of grades 6 through 8. In the email dated 8/14 in the pod section, third paragraph, it is stated that at the secondary level, students have classes with multiple teachers throughout the day, and no single group of students has the same schedule, making pods not possible for core instruction. And that the only safe way to bring in our secondary students and have them in these year-long pods is with an advisory day only. This decision of requiring secondary students to be in pods itself leads to students not being able to return to school for academic instruction, even for 2 days. Knowing that the pods are not conducive to a high school student's schedule, with students moving between classrooms, were there any other options considered other than pods at the secondary level? Trying to explain to our daughter how the administration ended up with grades 6 through 12 being in school just 1 day a week and not even for academic instruction has been a challenge. With her knowing some of her teammates from Holy Angels on the gymnastics team as Richfield co-ops with Holy Angels, that they are going to school 2 days a week, and some of the girls from her Girl Scout troop who attend school in Edina and Lakeville, and knowing that they're going to school 2 days a week, all using a schedule that is essentially what was option 3 in the family survey, has made this all the more difficult to explain and for her and us to accept. Other neighboring districts are using the hybrid model that's basically option 3 in the survey, in which students are in class 2 days a week. Did the administration work at all with other school districts when developing our hybrid model to see what works there and what they were doing? There doesn't appear to be any plans in place for bringing secondary students back to school more days than 1, with the only reference being the last bullet point on page 24 of the last page of the presentation that states that advanced modeling or planning would have to be needed to move to a less restrictive model. And with the administration stating that grades 6 through 12 are going to remain in pods the whole year, it appears that 1 day a week is the best it's going to be for the whole year for grades 6 through 12. I think the administration needs to be more straightforward with the students and family of secondary students regarding this. Closer to my heart, I have a concern about how this model will affect the music programs at RMS and RHS, band and choir. It appears that individual band lessons are proposed for one of the possible activities in the afternoon of a student's advisory day at Richfield High School. But what about choir students? And what are the options going to be for band and choir group practices and performances? Assuming the hybrid model for grades 6 through 12 goes forward as presented, I feel this administration needs to explain directly to the 6th and 12th graders in terms they can understand, i.e. no asynchronous, synchronous type statements, how they came to this decision, and whether this model of 1 day a week is essentially going to be in effect all year at best. I feel the older students at least deserve this explanation, and I know my daughter would like one. I ask the administration and staff to consider a model that brings secondary students into the schools at least 2 days a week, as was presented in the family survey we completed, at least sometime during the school year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Our final comment this evening is from Stephanie Maccabee. It is a written statement that will be read by Allegris Mishek.
RPS School Board. This comment is related to the last school board meeting's discussion on SROs, Student Resource Officers. I am grateful I could observe the board's discussion of this on YouTube video. One of my observations was, I am concerned that over the past few years, The 13 out of 16 students receiving citations whose demographics were identifiable were Black, Indigenous, people of color students. It is significant that the SRO has had autonomous meetings with students, with parent or guardian present possibly, but with no school staff present. Is this to avoid having to list this in the student record? That is, if a staff person is present, does this have to go into the student's file? I believe that, to be fair, school staff needs to be present, because I do not believe that it is only students of color who require a resource officer to speak to them, and these citations can later in life come up on the screen if a person is pulled over by the police, causing an officer to possibly treat that person more aggressively and lend energy towards the school-to-prison pipeline. I suggest strongly that meetings with officer and student consistently have a school psychologist, counselor, or social worker present who can help to identify what may be troubling a student. That person could offer other assistance and decrease anxiety about going to jail or even prison. I also request psychologists, counselors, and/or therapists make rounds at schools. They may observe unfair treatment by staff with students or even parents, including ignoring the same behavior of a white student that they may cite a Black, Indigenous, person of color student for. If this is occurring, it needs to be addressed. I believe it is also significant that the questionnaire commented on by students asks if the student agrees or disagrees with going to an SRO if they are having problems or needed help. This question in itself is inadequate. It does not allow for input on whether students would prefer to be able to talk to a counselor, psychologist, or therapist about their problems. A police officer's training is not to be a counselor. I ask for less funding for student resource officers and for more of the Safe Schools levy to go toward psychologists and therapists. This freeing up of Safe Schools funding for other services could be used for consultant services fees with pre-existing state licensed providers. This would be less costly than hiring a single staff person and would allow specialists to be consulted that are more trained for the issues the student may be having. Finally, please be aware that the number of neither agree nor disagree responses to the questionnaire, I agree, is significant. People may not wish to say they do not want the police in one situation, but do want them in another. I am in support of less uniformed police presences at our schools, but I ask for a single specific officer with interests in the youth. I hope that the students, when they get to have a meeting and discuss SROs further, get to speak freely enough that even if they express emotion, they are not judged as uncouth or aggressive. These issues have been simmering in the psyche of people in the city, nation, and world, and current protests and events exemplify this. I request that a specialist or specialists be present at this/these meetings that may diffuse or articulate what the students are trying to express. There are local therapists that have specializations in helping people through trauma, and the Twin Cities have certainly been experiencing significant trauma of late. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who contributed this evening. The next opportunity for public comment will be at our board meeting on Monday, September 21st. And I look forward to working with anyone who would like to address the board that evening. I also just want to acknowledge that that is a long ways away, and people are thinking through a lot, and we are all in the midst of some extraordinary decisions. And so I just also want to encourage people that you can contact us at any time. All of the individual board members are on the Richfield Public Schools website. Our emails are there, our phone numbers are there, and we certainly welcome hearing from you between now and September 21st as well. The superintendent update this evening contains the fall planning discussion on everyone's mind as we look into the future for Richfield Public Schools this fall. Before I turn things over to the superintendent, I just want to acknowledge that there are some things that we do have answers to and made decisions around, and we are eager to hear more of those details this evening. There are also many things that are still in the process of being determined, and as we work with our staff to determine some of our specific plans, especially as we continue to monitor public health data and listen to the expertise of health officials. And really that is the focus of the next several weeks, is on ensuring we do have a strong, clear, understandable, and safe plan for the start of the school year. And many more details are still going to be coming in communication to staff and families, and also in our next board meeting on Tuesday, September 8th. So with that, I will turn things over to the superintendent.
All right, so thank you. I'm here tonight to present to you our plan to provide education to the students of Richfield Public Schools this fall. And obviously, this is a year different from all others. For those looking for a summary, board packet pages 3, 4, and 5 show the outline of our overall plan. There are also approximately 200 pages of supporting data, of which will be tightened up as we move forward for overall communication. Tonight, I will talk about some of these things more in depth. Our plan begins by acknowledging the guidance from the governor, along with the CDC, Center for Disease Control, along with the MDH, Minnesota Department of Health. School decision-making begins by knowing that regardless of what the schools are offering in general, distance learning will be a choice all year long for families making that decision. That means that a family can choose and commit to distance learning regardless of our overall district learning model. Our next step is to give consideration of the current COVID infection rate in Hennepin County. The case rates per 10,000 provide for a 5-step structure, including 0 to 9 cases allowing in-person for all students. 10 to 19 per 10,000 allows in-person for elementary and hybrid at secondary. 20 to 29, hybrid for all students. 30 to 49 mean hybrid for elementary and distance for secondary. And 50 or more per 10,000 Hennepin County residents means distance learning for all students. Current Hennepin County rates are between 23 and 24, meaning that today's plan is hybrid for all students. It means also that we'll be constantly reevaluating case rates and making decisions based on current updated public health data. We plan throughout the summer with 15 core teams leading planning with members of all bargaining units and teams from across the district. It's this distributed leadership that created general support for our overall plan. It's also important to note that while our team is supportive, we are also fully aware and committed to the need for ongoing partnership and ongoing voice with our team members and community members as we continue to gather further detail to each component of our overall plan. As mentioned before, distance learning is a choice and an opportunity for any family or any student. Students choosing this model will be asked to commit for a grading period either 9 or 12 weeks. Commitments will be made but could be adjusted quicker if space is available. It's also important to note that much of our summer work was making our distance programming better. All students in distance will receive some synchronous live teaching. There will be small group discussions and interventions along with the opportunity to engage later if live instruction is missed. Our distance learning will be much improved and designed over months of teamwork across our district. Hybrid and in-person programming brings students into the building. In-person requires a set of safety precautions, including maintaining 50% capacity in the classroom, social distancing, enhanced cleaning, and masks. While there are technically different requirements for in-person school and hybrid, the maintaining of safety is a major focus of each option. I want to discuss hybrid the most this evening because our plan is to bring in all students using a hybrid model. And I really want to focus on a couple of the details because they have driven much of our planning. The largest piece to discuss is the need for pods. Pods are small groups of students, typically a classroom, that reduce exposure between groups and individual students. This is easiest to understand in an elementary classroom where students enter the classroom of a teacher, they remain in that pod or classroom for the entire day. Maintaining pods or small groups minimizes exposure to other students and is much more complicated at secondary. In one classroom at elementary, one student would be around one teacher and approximately 17 students. At secondary, and I'll discuss as I continue in further detail, creates some particularly large challenges. In elementary hybrid, we're working to bring in our students as frequently as possible while maintaining a pod and still able to provide effective cleaning for our buildings. K2 would be in for 4 days per week, with Wednesdays used for distance learning along with a full building-wide cleaning. Grades 3 through 5 would be in for 2 days per week, with half of the students on Monday and Tuesday, the other half on Thursday and Friday. Again, Wednesday is used for cleaning. The days when these students in grades 3 through 5 are not in the building are also used for distance learning. Essential childcare for critical workers is then provided during the time where students are in a distance model, using our staff, our paraprofessionals, to provide a structured learning environment for those students qualifying under the state definition of critical. Secondary school provides an added layer of challenge in maintaining a pod. Each secondary teacher has a content license. While elementary classroom teachers are able to teach in every subject, in secondary, teachers are licensed to teach only one subject. This licensure provides one of the large challenges, as students need to see many different teachers to receive their content. When we paired the licensing issue with feedback from students and parents given this past spring, we decided to create and use a POS method of enhanced advisory, providing advisory, check and connect, and a range of in-person supports and additional options to all of our secondary students. In middle school, the building would be used 2 days per week with this model, with 8th graders split and providing leadership support to the younger students, with 6th grade on one day and 7th on the other. In high school, grades 9 and 11 pair up on one day, with grades 10 and 12 paired up on a different day. Finally, with RCEP, our alternative program, also 1 day per week, set based on student needs, also providing a greater number of asynchronous or taped activities that can be accessed at any time, which appeals more to our alternative learners. Here you see an example of who would be in buildings on which specific days, including essential childcare, education, and also the staggered opportunities for each of our students. Transportation creates the next challenge. Structures to keep kids safe include assigned seats and routes with enhanced cleaning. We need to remove the hazardous bus service to support safely getting our students to school through crossing guards and patrol. We also are needing to move start times due to the 45-minute routes, up from 30 minutes or less because of enhanced cleaning needs. This would move Centennial and STEM to a 7:30 start, Sheridan Hills and RDLS to 8:15, and the middle school and high school to a 9 a.m. start. I also want to point out that we will continue to reevaluate our model as we continue receiving data based on case rates. We are prepared for distance, hybrid, and in-person models based on changing Hennepin County COVID numbers. We did absolutely send a survey to all RPS family and received responses, feedback, and information from over 3,400 respondents. I'm proud of our team members for our diligence and work in this area, and voice is very important and has gone into the planning of this model. Over 50% of all families, regardless of grade or ethnicity, wanted their students in school. Over 35% of all families wanted fully distance learning. Beyond that, 1/3 of families wanted their students in as much as possible, with another 30% wanting part-time in school. Overall, African American families preferred some time or 50% in school with some time or 50% out, meaning they wanted their students in more frequently, if at all possible. Latinx families also had similar responses, wanting students in school a significant period of time. Based on parent input, what we looked at were models that would have students in as much as possible while still maintaining safety standards. When looking at our transportation survey, we received the most public support for eliminating hazardous street crossings. This data helped us to make decisions about transportation. When surveying staff response strongly preferred online instruction, especially at the secondary level, with approximately 20% of the secondary level wanting in-person learning. It's important to remind us that pods at secondary are required for safety. Instruction where students cross pods cannot safely occur due to licensure issues. One student having 3 or 4 classes could be exposed to up to 100 students, rather than the 17 students in one classroom at the elementary level. Thus, to summarize our recommendation and plan, we're planning to begin our year with distance learning for the first week. During this week, we'll have individual family and student-teacher conferences. We'll distribute all learning materials and prepare all students and families for optimal learning. We'll fully launch the hybrid model on Monday, September 14th. Truly understanding why we're choosing this specific model requires an understanding of our philosophy along with our capacity. Looking at the survey data, we went to launch an in-person side of hybrid that maintained pods and safety measures while having students in as much as humanly possible. We also wanted to prioritize, similar to the governor, the younger students due to the reduced evidence of their transmission of COVID. We need to acknowledge that our classrooms are funded and staffed at 25 students per classroom, but are only able to hold about 75% of that number during COVID. We also need to acknowledge that based on a family selection of a distance model, somewhere around 30% of our staff will solely be used to provide distance learning. Finally, we need to add that we are only able to transport about 40% of the students we typically transport at any one time. When you put that together, that means that we can accommodate about half of our students on any given day at the most. On the surface, you can certainly suggest that our proposed model does not look like the parent preference. On the surface, you can also suggest that our proposed model does not look like the staff presence. We believe that we are bringing in the students to the greatest extent possible. Reduction in student numbers in school days are due to reductions in capacity created by reduced staffing, reduced classroom capacity, and reduced transportation ability. Wednesday at elementary is being used for cleaning. At secondary, we looked at many models. We could look and could go back and look at a block schedule where students only went to 4 classes daily. However, even in this model, assuming that students have half the same students in every class and half being new, each student would be exposed to between 50 and 100 students daily, then a different 50 to 100 the next day, and up to 8 teachers. That model is impossible while maintaining pods, and the main added safety needed at secondary school that aligns to the reality that secondary schools are similar to adults, secondary students are similar to adults in their transmission of COVID. I also want to add that there are many details not in my presentation that are either in the overall board packet or are continuing to be refined in the coming weeks. Special education, for example, where case managers will be working with families and possibly expanding their numbers of days in the building, depending on their individual needs, up to 4 days for each of those students. There's also not enough detail about activities where the high school league has launched 4 sports and we're continuing to examine the best ways and levels of student participation that are appropriate for our district. Finally, I want to acknowledge that this report is in the superintendent update and not a new business item for vote. The school board role and the superintendent role can be confusing. The board is the governing body and remains a role overseeing vision, policy, and evaluating the superintendent. As superintendent, I'm delegated the role of leading and managing. Many of the things we discuss at the board are not action items. Start times, instructional models, and many of the programs we use in our district are not voted on by the board. They are, however, discussed, overseen, and given guidance and feedback which provides administration clear direction on areas of focus, improvement, and implementation. Saying that out loud provides a great opportunity to turn it back to the board for input, questions, and guidance.
And before I do open it up for board member comments and questions, and I know we are going to have many of them this evening, I just want to build on Steve's last point and just say that as a board, we are responsible. Whether or not we vote on any given item, especially this one, we are responsible. And for the reasons that Steve outlined, our role is to advise the superintendent, and it is to hold the superintendent accountable, which we will do in this process, and want to acknowledge that we will be held accountable as well by members of our community, as we should be, regardless of what our final plans might be and whether or not we ever take any formal vote related to this. So I think it was important for me to say that out loud, and for people to hear that we are responsible and we are accountable regardless of whether or not we vote on this item. This evening, we are having a discussion, and that is so that the public can hear our discussion. It is so that the superintendent can hear what is on our mind as individual board members, but I also want people to know that the superintendent has been spending a lot of time with each one of us as individual board members over the last several weeks in having conversations and hearing our questions and concerns. And so what we are going to be talking about tonight is just a continuation of what has already been underway for quite some time. So with that, I'm going to open it up. And in our virtual meetings, we've been doing this in alphabetical order, but we are just going to throw the doors wide open here, and I'm going to see who would like to go first.
Do we have a brave soul? Yeah.
I could start. I'm afraid I'll never stop.
Well, and actually, that's good. It's okay to just ask some of the questions and comments, and we can do multiple rounds.
Okay, if that's fair. I do want to highlight then to start with, there has been concern raised about the survey options and what ultimately the plan was. And as a parent, I looked at the survey and said hybrid models, in-person, schooling, and in no way did I think it was going to be, strictly advisory for secondary. I have the opportunity to hear more feedback on that, but we have not communicated nearly well enough, how we came to that decision that it would be. It's interesting, when people said it was important for students to be in school, they said, of course, the academic contact, and then they listed a number of ancillary things. And we're providing all the ancillary things in that secondary one day, but none of the traditional academic content, it seems. And so I think we haven't been clear enough on that. And the other part of that people have asked about, and I certainly understand, is if we were aware of that at the time, why would we phrase it or word it or present it in a way that suggested hey, do you want your students in school? Even if it means it's going to be largely, we didn't include, now of course it would be a 7,000-page document if we included all of the details, but that's a challenge, right? So that's something we have some explaining to do on, because it does seem to be that the loudest concern raised is, this is not what I thought I filled in the survey. It doesn't seem to match. Now, we've presented it and sort of bent the results to sort of support it, but I don't think the question asked necessarily matches what we've offered, even though it does in some ways, it doesn't in others.
So I guess I would respond to bent it to match. I would say we are not providing what specifically I would acknowledge is asked for by the parents. So we have 60% of our parents that I would read the survey and I would interpret it as would like their kids in every day, pretty much all day, if at all possible. Or a reasonable percent would like that. I'm going to also acknowledge that we are not presenting a plan that is what the staff are asking for either, where there is a percentage that are looking at distance learning. We are trying to set up a situation where we are bringing in kids as often as we can. There are capacity issues specifically at elementary. There are also licensure and teaching issues and pod issues. Did we know those pieces? I would say districts are learning now as things continue on. As districts open up in the South and students go from class to class, we are seeing districts shut down already. We are seeing districts that have not chosen a pod model end up in a situation where they're not able to provide more than a week in instruction. And colleges, I believe the most recent one, North Carolina, just shut down today after 1 week of classes. What we're also finding is that if we look at trying to provide in person and try to provide academic content, there is an assumption that there are teachers of all licensure area present to do that. So I'll pick a subject that we don't have, for example, and imagine that we taught Japanese in our school. If our Japanese teacher has a physical health accommodation and can only teach from a distance, we are now not able to staff that class in person. And so as we look at all of the possible staff licensure area situations, we are not able to have teachers teaching across content areas that they're not trained for. We also are not able to staff every single piece of our building. And so at K2 and 3-5, we are bringing in kids to the literal fullest extent that we can, where we are able to cover it with teachers in the classroom and have the physical capacity for space. Some things people have brought up are using space at other buildings that are open. It's not a function of space. It's a function of having K6 licensed teachers be able to teach the sections. And then at secondary, it is both not doing the additional exposure that is protected by pods, which then makes it very challenging to do content from a license perspective, and trying to keep kids safe while having them in as much as we felt that we could do that from a safe perspective.
And I certainly understand that, and I appreciate it, and that is a real logistical concern and a hurdle that's almost impossible to get over. And actually I find what's rolled out as thoughtful, but it is, without knowing how the parents would respond, I suppose we could get into all this detail and they might not have chosen it, and we didn't necessarily know the staff opinion at the time either. And so there's things where those two bits of information meld together, I guess, and that's something for the public to, that we have explaining to the public to do is all. Mm-hmm. And so we're starting that tonight, it seems.
Absolutely.
And that's okay.
So we've definitely shared a couple of things, and our communications professional, Jennifer Valley, is sending out letters on a very fast basis. And we are learning the things that are appreciated by the public, and we are learning the things that are not. And so we are also continuing to develop details as we work on each of those components. And so we continue to produce communication documents, and we'll continue to share all the way up to the start of school and obviously beyond, as things will continue to adjust all the way through.
If I could pick one thing you'd mentioned, one of our greatest concerns is actually the space and managing the number in a building, and also transportation. And the elementary plan almost, I do have a concern about the 4 days for K2 and with half of the 3-5s present at all times, because that means half the 75% of the students will be present in a building at the same time. I mean, it'll be lower based on opt-outs.
So if one assumes 30% for distance learning,
and our numbers are roughly half.
30 to 40, it should be 50% or lower across the building, yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure we understand that, and that we're not straining the busing, and we're not straining the number of people within a building.
We believe we are at the maximum we can transport, which is also why we are removing the hazardous crossings or recommending that later in our policy tonight. And that was supported at most. I don't think our parents would prefer that, but that is what they would work with the best, and actually accommodates our plan.
Thanks. I'll give it back to others to jump in for fear that I'll just keep rolling.
So I'd like to add a little bit, just based on what you said and what I have, some of the questions that I have asked over the past couple of weeks. And one of the things that I really appreciate about what they are doing on that one day and at the beginning of school for all of our students is taking some time to prepare them for distance learning. And looking around at what Steve already mentioned about other schools and colleges and how as groups and schools and students have come together, rates have gone up and places have closed. I think it's important to prepare for that possibility as we move forward. So if we are forced to go to distance learning in the next couple of months, doing this work up front first with our students while they're in our buildings will pay off for us in the end. So I think that is a really important point to make, that is part of that. Advisory is also focused on getting those students ready and providing supports for them so that they are able, if we go to distance, to handle that better. And those skills will go with them as they go to college, because a lot of college classes are online and distance, even without COVID. So it's a valuable skill either way, I think. So I do appreciate that aspect of it, and I like that we're doing it across the board in all of our schools.
Yep.
And I'll just tack on the busing. I had made a suggestion, and I don't know what eventually came of it, but since Minneapolis and St. Paul are all distance learning, could we get access to their bus drivers or something, since they're not being used and we need people to transport our students? Is that an option available to us?
I know that Mr. Holge has explored outside options. We did develop a model that we felt was sustainable, and we were able to maintain our schools on 3 start times. Either way, we had to go to 45-minute bus route times. And the biggest component from transportation is removing the hazardous crossing piece, but we feel that given the plan we're presenting, we're actually able to transport the students we are looking to, and additional buses really aren't the barrier in the shorter term. It's more around classroom capacity is the biggest piece, and then the amount of staff we actually have available in addition to the licensed staff that we have in those areas. I want to repeat something you said because I think it's important that people who are listening hear it, which is, yes, we are preparing ourselves for the possibility of distance in the future, and we will continue to monitor rates. But as you look at schools that have opened and have not followed a pod model, they are moving to distance, and they're moving that way extremely quickly. And so we're going to continue to monitor rates. We're going to continue to monitor and adjust, and we are going to make sure that we are ready for whatever comes our way in increases or decreases in numbers.
So a couple of comments. First of all, I very much appreciate the comments that you made relative to the importance of the pods at secondary. I think that we need to definitely be aware of the one thing that we do know about this virus and about the capacity we have to try to mitigate spread of the virus is that the only tool we have is social distancing. That's been really clear, I think, throughout the course of the pandemic, that the most effective tool for mitigating the spread of the virus is social distancing. So I think that's just a reality, and then it's also clear that these secondary age students do transmit the virus in a different way. We have pretty good evidence now that secondary students will transmit that virus differently than the younger kids. So I'm appreciative of the challenges of mitigating COVID at the secondary school. I think the other aspect of it, which is just to sort of build on the point that you made, is that there are several reasons why why individual students or individual pods could be moving to distance themselves quite rapidly. So Obviously, if we do have a COVID case in one of our buildings, then we have to have a number of students who are going to be out for a defined period of time and or staff on the basis of close contact. The only way that we can mitigate that outcome is by keeping the social distancing rigid. And so this is a very difficult but real reality for our students at secondary, that it's just going to simply be a different experience for them. I think the other aspect of it is that a confirmed case of COVID is not the only reason why students will be missing a lot more school this year than they would have in the past. There are all sorts of viruses. We all know about them. Common colds, that cause you to have a fever and a cough, and you have no idea, do I have coronavirus or not? Mm-hmm. And so you need to stay home until you are better. So even if you're not out for the full 10 days, with a non-COVID illness, you're still out. And so there's going to be a lot of folks who are going to be doing distance learning. Even if they really want to be in school, they're going to be out. And I think the other element of this is that the quickest way for us to see as Steve mentioned, the quickest way for us to see our opportunities for in-person learning sort of melt away is to start having cases. So the best way that we can preserve those opportunities is to be extremely vigilant about following the guidance on maintaining social distancing, universal masking, and staying home when you're sick. And so I think that that's a difficult reality, but it's a real one.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I'm not expecting people to read immediately through 200 pages of the board packet. But these are the things that we'll be communicating out. So imagine a student shows up with a cold or a runny nose or a fever. They're immediately home for 10 to 14 days, depending. If that student then is diagnosed with COVID, all of the students that have had exposure are then out for 10 to 14 days, as are all of the staff. In a pod model, that's 1 staff and 17 students, give or take, at secondary. In a non-pod model, that is upwards of 8 staff and could be up to 200 students at secondary. And so the non-pod model creates this situation that makes it extremely challenging to maintain. At elementary, obviously, it is much easier when a teacher goes into the classroom and can have their students all day long. Licensure and ability to teach multiple subjects at secondary absolutely makes us much more vulnerable to the risk of COVID. And again, echoing where I started and where you talked about, Dr. Tensing, a student who wants to come to school with a cold shows up to school with a cold and they are isolated and then asked to stay home for 10 days, pending a COVID test. And so it becomes a lot of students missing school as individuals, as groups of 7, as pods, or as up to 200 students and 8 teachers, depending on who they are intermingling with.
Yeah, so I think philosophically it does make sense, and I think Christine and others have touched on this, that we know that distance is going to be a component of the experience for all of our students, and doing distance right and doing distance as effectively as we can is important. And then I think the other thing that philosophically makes sense is we say, okay, well, let's try to get those social interactions, because we know how important those are. Let's try to get them as much as we can, but knowing that that's going to be probably the second, that's going to be the much more difficult area to commit to. And that's going to also be the area that'll be potentially falling back.
Well, that is the issue that everybody spoke of in the spring, is social, emotional, and mental health of children was something we needed to put some additional time in to focus on, and that is where that extra commitment to do that work has really come in.
I'm going to ask a direct follow-up question, so I'll be brief, but I did hear from one of our teachers today who asked the question about what happens when a student is symptomatic. How is it determined that it is actually safe for them to come back? Because sometimes symptoms go beyond 10 days or 14 days.
Yeah.
So who is actually making that determination, and how can we have confidence that we are not going to just be putting people right back at
So
risk
what
again.
what we know medically is that shedding of infectious COVID, SARS-CoV-2, is something that we have studied. There are studies with folks who have been infected with SARS-CoV-2, and they will shed live virus for about 10 days beyond the onset of the illness. After about 10 days, more than 99% of people are no longer shedding live virus. You can still detect viral DNA in those folks, so if you do a PCR test, you may get positive, but those viral particles are not infectious. This was reported out in the New England Journal of Medicine this spring. The other thing that we know is that the more severe your illness, the longer you shed. So that's where we have some advantage in that younger people tend to get less sick. So small children and teenagers are going to shed virus for a shorter duration of time than older folks. And so the folks who are sickest and end up in the hospital or end up in the ICU, they may shed virus for 21 days. So those are some of the kind of medical facts on which would guide the guidelines on when it's safe to return. So it was those studies that led CDC to modify their return to work, and really return to school is the same concept, from 14 days to 10 days, with being 3 days beyond fever. And so fever is the most specific symptom. All of the other symptoms, whether it be cough, runny nose, sore throat, body aches, all the other stuff that can go along with COVID, those symptoms could be due to many different things and don't necessarily correlate with shedding of virus. It's fever that tells you that your body is actively fighting off this infection. So that's where our return to, based on the guidelines that are both from the Minnesota Department of Health and CDC, and Dr. Clarkson and her team have been doing quite a bit of work on this, that's where you end up with some fairly good guidance on when a person is out ill, when can they come back. And we have a number of scenarios that Dr. Clarkson could review with you in detail on exactly, sort of if this, then that. And I think there might be 10 plus different kind of sets of parameters that will guide the different guidance that we would give. The other element on that is, we're going to take into account, does this person have a COVID test or not? Are they COVID positive? Are they COVID negative? Or are they COVID unknown? There are those folks who will have a fever and they'll have COVID-like symptoms, and they'll go see their doctor, and they'll get tested, they'll get negative, the doctor will check them out and will realize, oh, I guess you've got strep throat. We have an alternative diagnosis here. So we have an alternative explanation for the symptoms, and we know it's not COVID, therefore you can return in a more expeditious manner. Same thing would be true for any number of other febrile illnesses that would be common among people in the fall. If the person chooses not to get medical attention and chooses not to be COVID tested, that's where you get that 14 days. So that's...
And as always, we're incredibly fortunate to have a medical doctor sitting on our school board. And it looks like Dr. Clarkson, who is not a medical doctor, but has expertise in education, is going to share more.
And I think, and I'll steal her thunder, I think Dr. Tensing brought it all up, but in the board packet, we do have the decision tree that kind of walks us through all of those things, which was one of Dr. Clarkson's teams worked on. If there's any added detail, please.
And Dr. Tensing and another community member are part of our planning team, so their expertise are very much appreciated, as well as we are developing a COVID guide, and we have a COVID coordinator, which the district is required to have, that oversees that whole process, which is a licensed school nurse who works closely with the Department of Health, and then also the Department of Health is creating these teams, these response teams, to help districts respond when there is a case of COVID and how we communicate that out and what the expectations are about how long people are out and their return to school. So it's not ever the district just going to the wall. Thank you.
And I think, again, just getting into that secondary piece, the difficult reality is that the more you increase social contact, the more you're just increasing the odds. It's just math, unfortunately. So,
Thank you.
yep.
So I can lead off with something related to what Pete just said. So I guess I want to bring up some of the potential challenges of providing athletics. And I recognize how important that is, but I really want us all to be aware of kind of the choices we're making by offering that. So we all just talked about the fact that we are limiting students in the building to 1 day per week, and we're separating them into pods. And then we're providing for them to participate in sports after school, some more that it looks like there will be more than 1 day a week. And that will inevitably intermix these pods that we are separating out in our school days. So if there's a positive case in that mix, it's going to come back to the teacher, our coach is probably a teacher, and students that are in different pods, because not all the same kids in the sport play in the same pod. I asked about if there was a way to do that, but they're different grades. I think that's next to impossible. So I just think it's something that we have to be aware of. Does it make sense to provide that and mix these pods in that way? And we just, if that's what we're going to do, I just think we need to be really aware that that's the choice that we're making, that if we do that. So.
I think our athletic department and activity director are currently working on how do you do these things in the safest possible way, and really trying to figure that out, between being outside, between being masked, and then trying to figure out what things are acceptable and what are not. I would say that the Minnesota State High School League has done a great job of, I would say, allowing a lot of activities. As we look at things like scrimmages and games, which obviously intermingle students across buildings even, in addition to across classrooms, I would say I don't know enough medically to have a recommendation there. I would say that I know that I'm glad we are looking into that and trying to figure out what are the ways to do that safely. And so that we can decide which of the State High School League rules or suggestions are appropriate and where do we want to be more strict, if that's something that we want to have as a conversation. And those are things we are looking at and trying to figure out where is that right place for activities and athletics.
And as I look through all of this, the kind of thing that comes out to me is to, like what you're talking about, to take into account CDC guidelines and MDH guidelines, and not just what we hear from Minnesota State High School League, but really to go a level up from what those recommendations are and make sure that, like you said, we're trying to do that as safe as we possibly can.
I think it is hard to try to find that sweet, perfect spot, and speaking with
There
one.
isn't one.
No, of which there isn't. In talking to our band teacher who has a list of 5 things at the middle school that would make it more safe, even then, the ideal is obviously to hope for sunny days where he can bring them outside, and do that when possible, and then doing things over the internet, just because the huge difference between inside and outside. So there are a lot of areas where we're going to continue to collaborate with our staff and continue to collaborate with our families and really tighten up details and really make some of those ancillary next steps of decisions, because I certainly am not presenting to you something tonight that has every decision made. There are lots of conversations about what exactly will the instructional day look like, down to some of those finer details and some of the finer details of everything else.
Can I ask the athletics, and I agree with the sentiment that we would not really do well to rely on the health guidance of the State High School League, who it breaks their heart to not offer the activities. They really they try their darndest to make sure the activities run. It is within their guidance that, or their rules even, that if a school is by case count on distance learning, then they can only do remote practicing. But it is open, right, for if we have students if we are in the hybrid range like we are, and students opt into the distance learning, how do they get treated? Are they allowed to participate on the Monday to Friday practice?
They are.
Okay.
And then from an activity bus perspective, because I know that was a question that you had also asked, we are currently looking at our transportation models, and we're polling drivers to make sure that we have drivers that would be able to provide that if an option. And so we should have that answer in the coming weeks.
And you just mentioned band and like music, choral. There are some specials specialist classes that I imagine Phi-Ed will be outside as much as possible as well, right?
Absolutely.
In the aspect with the goal of I mean, I think and Peter can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but being outside is a very different dynamic.
Being outside is a mitigating factor.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Yep.
Yeah, so there's that, but and you had mentioned, can music or instrument lessons or choral be outside or inside? Very different, right? If we can be outside, if they can't, that is a much higher risk of contamination if people are singing and projecting a lot of exhaust, and so things like art, foods classes, the high school, all kinds of classes that will require some sort of firm plan. I don't expect us to have it tonight, but there are a lot of specialist electives that are very challenging to do in a non-traditional way.
Right, so here's what I want to name, because we've had a lot of conversations with our bargaining units. So we had 80 people working over the summer, which means that there were 580 people who were not. They were on their summer break. They're not actually paid to work over the summer. And so the people who came in had the time and were willing and able to do that. And so the last thing a foods instructor, for example, needs is me telling them how to teach a foods class in the first place, but B, how to do that in the times of COVID. And so one of the things that we are forgetting and why some of the details aren't fully in place is there's a large number of staff to still have a voice in this conversation about what it looks like. And the superintendent, assistant superintendent, or any of our team are not necessarily the people to give definition about exactly what that looks like in a best practice model. We can do some of the safety guidance, we can do some of the structural guidance, but how to actually teach foods in a time of COVID where outside is the best, that we absolutely need the foods teacher on site to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think those specifics they're understood once they're said out loud, right? That the staff does not, the licensed staff tends not to come back until the week before classes. So which means we're still 2 weeks away from their first day reporting back, even though they may have thought of things and as they do on vacation, but they're not obligated to. I'm looking at some of the educators here. You must take mental breaks in the summer, as you've earned them, and so it's understandable if you're not, thinking back of how to handle the challenges of this coming fall.
Right, and what we do know is they are looking at it, they are thinking about it, but as you know in the board packet, there's somewhere in the range of 200 pages of documentation to weed through, and so some of their basic questions like, what happens if I get sick? Or what happens if a student comes into the class and gets sick? They're needing to take time to read, review, digest, but then also have us bring them in to train and to talk to them about some of the most important pieces so that we are all on the same page as one Richfield.
I'd like to piggyback off of that. This is more of a comment for my lack of questions this evening. I, in my day job, work as a district admin in a nearby district in Hennepin County and have been spending all of my days and nights and weekends with brilliant people working with very similar pieces to what you're all working with in Richfield. And I feel really confident that if there was a unicorn option that would be this amazing option for everybody, we would have found it. And we would all know about it because it would be famous across the country. I think the communication piece that I have struggled with is finding that right balance of communicating as fast as possible so that staff and families can make decisions. But our models need the information to form the model to begin with. So for example, it's hard to build a model when you don't know exactly how many students and staff you're working with. And it's hard for families and staff to commit to something that you can't tell them more details about. So it's a constant, move a little bit, say a little bit, get more information, move a little bit forward, go back. Because what's difficult is when you say something that then one of the 10,000 pieces change and you have to walk it back, because I know that feels horrible for everybody involved. So I just want to say that I have appreciate everything that I've seen. I know how many brilliant people are working on this around the clock, and I think as much as possible for our public to understand that the fluidity is going to continue because the virus continues to shift. Our numbers continue to shift in Hennepin County. I also realize how frustrating that is for everybody involved to not have something you can hold on to that you know will be there throughout the year.
Okay, so I guess I'm up. I've been in my house for 4 months, cheating with the supermarket, I guess, and the gas station, and taking my kid to daycare recently. This is how first I want to apologize to the community for the perception that the survey meant that you were gonna get what you asked for. And I say that as for myself. I don't know if, you know what I mean? Like, but that's really it, because I know how surveys go, that you're really trying to try to provide to people their choice. But you cannot, it's like when I'm teaching and I'm signing for parent conferences, you choose 2 choices, but if other 2 parents already picked those, then you're gonna have to go with the third one. To put it in a context that our parents watching at home, maybe, it's like apples and oranges, but kind of like that. So this proposal, the way I see it, is trying to give the physical instruction, personal instruction to the students. And we all know that students, humans are social beings, and we all know that we have more experience teaching in person than we do online. And there's a lot of things that we know, but there's also a lot that we don't know about this virus. Where is it going? How is it, it's a very dangerous space. So like for myself, I struggle. Like my son is gonna stay home this year. My 4-year-old has to go to daycare because I have to work. So we can, there's no unicorn, unfortunately. And the worry that I have, even like my own personal fears made me even fearful of having kids coming 2 days a week, 1 day a week, 4 days, but that's my personal view, and it's not what parents in the majority felt when they did their survey. So that's how hard this is. And I'm very worried that because of fevers that happen for other reasons. I mean, teachers, we know that kids get, strep, they get the flu, they get colds, they get runny noses all year round. My daughter has had a runny nose for 2 years since she started daycare. And that child showing up who does not have COVID is going to interrupt his or her own learning, because they're going to be sent home until they figure out what's wrong with them. The other 16 kids at elementary are going to be sent home. That teacher is probably going to be home. And this is like I'm very worried about the recipe for destruction, of how much interruption that is going to cause, and how I think that if I just know with my 7th grader that he's just going to be home and he's going to do it, right? Like, then I don't have to worry about what's going to happen if he starts and then he stops. And then I agree with Christine that, yes, even a week that they see a teacher face-to-face, especially the little ones, is good. Because I taught elementary 7 years. Like, I can fathom what would it be to teach a kindergartner coming to school for the first time, in this way. But I guess I just wanted to say that I think that the administration and the team here has done the best that they can to try to accommodate as much as possible. And I'm hoping that the worst case scenarios don't happen, and I hope that things get better and that then we can start bringing our kids back to the buildings, because really it's what we want. But there's no magic one here. I have 2 questions, sorry. One is, what kind of education are essential workers' children receiving?
So there are 2 different components. There is the same classroom hybrid model that everyone will be receiving, but then they're entitled to free childcare. And so Dr. Clarkson and her team are developing a supervised instructional support model. And so there will be, rather than Fun Club, who we used in the spring, our paraprofessionals and our team members will be providing oversight and helping to make sure that they're engaged in instruction and learning. And so they won't be with classroom teachers, but they will be with the students from childcare, and it will be an instructional support care. And Dr. Clarkson will come back and give more details.
Okay, so I will respond to the one comment from the community member. Fun Club will be providing some type of childcare, and I don't know, we're not sure if they'll be able to have space to do it full days. But there isn't the same expectation because they are not a school-sponsored childcare that they will be providing instruction during that time. Ours, we have a registration page that is already up and going. We have, I believe, last time I checked this afternoon, we have about 16 students that are enrolled in our instructional supported model for our Tier 1 families. So we'll continue to take registrations, and they can choose the number of days that that their child will attend, and it'll be offered any day that the in-person is not being offered.
So the biggest difference being that Fun Club is a recreation-based program, and this is supervision that includes the school day, 6.5 hours, that then is supporting them in the learning that's happening in their classroom in a distance model during those days.
So they will be enrolled with everyone else, is what you're saying?
That is a requirement of the state of Minnesota, yes.
Okay, and that's what I was worried, because it sounded earlier as if those students were going to go to Fun Club and were not going to receive their content, grade level content, but it's good to
They'll
hear.
have a support staff in there helping them, so they'll be able to access their distance learning that would be taking place. So they'll be able to go through their scheduled day, just won't be in the classrooms.
But not connected to Fun Club at all. Fun Club is a completely separate program, and while we use their services in the spring, this fall, because we are having more live teaching occurring and live streaming, we aren't using their services during the school day this year.
And I promise this is the last one for these.
It's okay.
The transition, and I know there's a lot of, but it's in the documents, but I like to discuss publicly what the transition from hybrid to distance will be in case of emergency, in case we have to wrap up and.
So that
Hold
could,
on, Steve, sorry. One component too, for those teachers that, there's some teachers that will already be assigned like distance only for the students for the parents who chose that. But then the teachers who are in person, I mean, what kind of support will they get to then make the switch in the midst of, after the year has started?
so we are actually conducting almost all of our training around safety measures and distance learning. And so we are under the expectation that there will likely be transitions consistently throughout the year. And so there will be classroom transitions, there could be school transitions, and there could be district transitions. Classrooms would transition if there is an exposure within the classroom, and the entire classroom would then be isolated at home and would then go into distance learning, which could be supported by the teacher if they do not have symptoms that made it so that they couldn't teach online, or it would be supported by substitutes or additional supports from the district. There could be a school that ends up closing, and it could also be the district. And all that is going to have to do with exposure, possible cases, and then also across the community what our overall data looks like. But we should be prepared to do that, and we are, and it will be on very short notice, especially at the classroom level.
I have two things, I think, maybe three. Technology. So how are we handling the technology? I know in the spring it was a very different environment, of course, but with the grade 3 through 5 having 3 days of distance learning, are we assuming to go one-to-one Chromebook for them?
We are distributing one-to-one across the entire district for every single student. That's some of the things. In our first week, we're going to have those community meeting conversations, teachers and students. We're going to distribute materials, distribute food, and then also distribute technology as appropriate.
Super. That's great to hear. Thank you. Also, I appreciate you bringing up the clarification that students with an IEP and special ed population who need other accommodations, that if they're in secondary, they are not confined to a 1 day a week, or if they're in grades 3 through 5, they are not restricted to 2 days a week. We students who have additional needs and have a plan for such, we can be flexible and accommodate, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Super. And their building lead and the people, the team they work with will be reaching out to them as they come back into the system, correct? Super.
We just can't get enough Dr. Clark.
Getting their steps in.
Ask some other questions.
Oh, I have other questions.
Dr. Mobley, who's our Director of Special Ed, has been working throughout the summer with all of the leads. There's already been outreach to many of our families whose children receive services. They started when the original survey went out to find out. They did direct outreach to our students on IEPs. And the first group that they are prioritizing in particular are our students that have higher level of needs, that spend more time receiving special education services throughout the day. And they've contacted the majority of them to find out what their needs are and to start planning for up to 4 days of in-person for our center-based students. And then there'll be, all case managers will have communicated and scheduled planning meetings with all of the families going into early September.
Will similar flexibility be extended to students in the RCEP program? Although they may not necessarily have IEPs, but they're in an alternative program, and so we recognize that they're there because there might be challenges that they deal with that have placed them in this program, or they've opted into it for reasons that mean that there might be more, like the 1 day that's listed here. How flexible are we on that if requested?
I don't want to speak on behalf of Dr. Wilhite. I know that student needs always come first in her planning and with her team, so we can get back to you on exactly what those plans are.
That's great. That's great. And so I know we have a lot of work to do on a masking policy. I know that you've probably been scrambling to make sure that the staff are aware of their supports, protections, and leave options and things like that, right?
Yes, we were considering going with masking as a procedure. However, we have rethought that theory and are going to be presenting a masking policy to the board. It will probably have been informally sent to the board because the School Boards Association and the state have come out with several model policies for us to examine and play with. So we'll probably try to do that on an expedited basis to hopefully present and pass in a one reading on the 8th of September.
So I'm going to just jump in on that particular subject, and if you were going to move on, can I?
Yeah, go
Or were you
ahead.
going to ask about that?
No, I was going to wrap up.
Okay, since this is on the same subject, I think it's really important to cross-reference that with CDC and MDH guidelines. I looked at the MSBA policy, and it's very loose and very open to interpretation. And I feel pretty strongly that we need to be more specific than what's in there. It openly gives the option of wearing a face shield, which has not been proven to provide any protection. I think it's important that we define what is acceptable as a mask. So recent studies have come out that show that the bandana or gaiter type actually can make it easier to transmit, but definitely is not any better than no mask. And then also like the correct way to wear a mask so you're covering mouth and nose. So
We will look at all details and try to figure out that best policy, and we will informally gather some feedback on options over the next 3 weeks.
yeah, I think one of the exceptions that I find concerning is that if it impedes instruction in any way, that you can remove the mask. And I think we all can pretty much say a mask is going to impede instruction. It's just part of the process. It's not going to be easy.
That you can't teach phonics with a mask on. to kindergarten. I mean, maybe our genius teachers here can, but I can't fathom how that would work. But there are better things, in my personal opinion, that kindergarten should be doing anyway. So I think that's the least of the problems.
And so I can just add on to one thing onto that just from experience, I know how challenging it can be to wear a mask for 8 hours and teach. I've been back in the teaching lab at work this summer already, and I get a good break, and I have an office I can go to and remove my mask and take a few minutes off, and it is very challenging. Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's really hard. So I also think we maybe want to consider what supports we can put in place for teachers and staff through the process, different ways we might be able to help prepare them for that challenge. I know we've talked about taking advantage of summer school, the summer school faculty's insight in their experience and sharing that broadly. But I think just kind of perhaps looking into different ways that we can support that process.
Agreed.
So, sorry, Tim.
No, that's okay. I would just wrap up with, I know I've asked a lot of questions or had comments that may sound critical, but I have said for a month or so, like the most honest, if someone said, what's the method or delivery of education that we could promise that would be delivered as we described it in the middle of the summer? And it is distance learning. It's the least likely to be disrupted. And yet, as we've learned through the surveys and some of the comments from the public, there's aspects of it that are wildly unpopular. And so, as Allegra had said, many people have been looking for the unicorn, and no one's really found it. And so we are trying to put together the puzzle best we can, even though it seems to be made up of different sets.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You may have noticed.
I would agree. It is very challenging. It is very challenging.
I have a couple of comments and questions, and we're right at about the 1 hour mark for this one conversation, so I want to be mindful of that, but this is really important. I think people expect us to talk as long as we need to talk about it, so I also am not interested in cutting conversation prematurely short. I think you have shared the specific rationale for why 6 through 12 is 1 day a week in person as it relates to the pod safety philosophy and the licensure challenges and requirements. I don't feel like I know that same rationale for why 3rd through 5th is 2 days a week as opposed to the earlier elementary grades being 4 days a week. So can you say more about that?
Sure. In the governor's plan, it suggests, and COVID data suggests, younger should be prioritized. And so we began with kindergarten and trying with the philosophy of getting students in as often as we could and as many days as possible. And as we looked for the amount of staff we're going to have and the physical space that those staff will need to teach, this essentially provides the most amount of students we can actually have in a building at a given time. To understand it mathematically, about 30% of our staff will be teaching distance learning, so we're down to 70% of our staff already at K-5. Then, of that 70% of our staff, they're only able to teach 3/4 of the amount of students. And so we have to have more classrooms for our students to be able to fit in. And so we just don't have the staff to be able to staff more classrooms and bring more students in.
Okay, thank you. I think the next couple of questions are related to that pod philosophy, specifically as it applies to secondary, because I think that is where we are all hearing people are looking for more than 1 day a week in person, and I want people to know that, like, we hear you. We hear the dissatisfaction with the model as it's currently structured for 1 day a week in person at the secondary level. So you talked about, there are a lot of examples of non-pod models that are leading to widespread closures. Do we have successful examples that show that taking a harder line pod philosophy is actually paying off?
We will need to study and gather additional data. Right now, the places that aren't closing aren't hitting national headlines and local headlines. It's all the places that are, and frankly, they're closing within the first week. And so I can certainly look to that in the coming weeks.
That actually connects to just a broader concern of mine, which is everyone is in crisis moment. We do not actually have great information holistically about what is working and how to learn from that, as everyone is just trying to plan day by day at this point. I think a question that certainly has come up is that we do have neighboring districts that are doing 2 days a week. I think in particular at the secondary level, are they not following the pod philosophy that you have articulated that is our priority?
They are not following the pod philosophy. That would be accurate. They are, for the most part, moving to a block schedule, which would have 3 or 4 classes in a day, is the best knowledge that I have about those that are coming in twice. And so they would take their instructional day and split it over 2, and then students would go to all of those classes.
Okay, thank you. That is also helpful. And then I think the couple of things that I would just say in follow-up, I really appreciated the point that was made by Mr. Kleist in his public comment earlier about, I think, the critical need for us to have direct communication with our students about the decisions that we are making, how deeply we know they affect them, and why they are what they are. And I think there are very age-appropriate ways to do that, from our littlest learners all the way up to our high school students. And so I really want to see how we are going to be doing that and how we are going to help them just come into this with us, and also help them understand what it's going to look like when they do come into school, like physically. What is it going to look like? And give them a sense of that before they get here for the first time. I think that the 2 final points I would make, one is just so people hear me say, I'm really reluctant and concerned about something that could feel like a series of starts and stops and starts again of students and of our staff coming in and out over and over again based on pod exposure, because that to me feels potentially traumatic in other ways. And so that is something that as we get closer to this is something I'm going to want to know more about, how we're approaching from a decision-making point of view, and at what point do we make the decision that actually, based on the data, based on what we're seeing in our own district, the safest thing is to make that transition to distance learning for however long. So that's on my mind. And then I think the last thing I would just say is what is being shared tonight is the current best, and we know less than ideal thinking. And there is still a good amount of time to go before students would be back in buildings, especially given the 1 week sort of all virtual start to the school year that has been shared. And so I want people to know this is fluid. We are not going to open school if we don't feel like we can or should safely and in alignment with what people are looking to us to do. And that obviously includes actually listening to the experts who know this far better than I ever could or will be able to. But I think people need to know that we are going to make hard decisions when we need to make them based on the information that's available at that time. I'm looking around. Is there anything else that people would like to add?
I do have one more thing.
Sure.
So I guess I just want to, and some of this is connected to what Crystal said, but to bring us back to March and April of last year, and when we had our student representatives here, and how much you could see how it was all affecting them, and very much related to what you said about communicating and working with our students, and especially these high school students that are going to be here 1 day a week.
Yep.
We did a distance survey in April, and I watched that presentation again earlier today, and a couple of the things that I noted and that were mentioned in there were things like holding more face-to-face class, so having some synchronous learning. So I see that we've added that, so that is really good. A couple of things, and then also the social emotional supports, that added social aspect for our students. I think incorporating that into that day and also into their distance days, I think those things are being looked at and done. Another thing that I saw, and I'm sure this is being worked on, but I just wanted to bring it up again, there were a lot of students that felt the work was too much, and that's a common thing when you go to online and distance, is the workload can increase a lot more than you realize it is when you don't have the students in your classroom. So making sure that, everybody's aware of that. We talked about it, and it was in that survey. Also, another thing that was brought up was hotspots, making sure we have enough of those to go around to families that need them. And then another comment that I saw in things that we said we would look forward to helping work out was how to help households that run out of data. So those were just a couple things that I saw on that survey. I think a lot of it is being addressed, and I'm guessing the rest is on the way in the many wheels that are turning as we move closer to opening school.
Those are all details in the conversation, and those are all the things that we are looking to try to provide. And then just to repeat something that Crystal said, which is this is still fluid. There are 4 weeks from today till the first students come to school in that actual capacity, from this very moment right here. And so what that means is that is 4 sets of data that we will look at. That is another 4 weeks of information that we're going to have to try to determine. And we'll have 4 weeks of more knowledge of how many people are choosing distance, how many, are there more students we could accommodate? Are there fewer students that we could accommodate? What are those things that we can actually continue and continue to solidify? And we will give you our word as administration and staff of this district. We will keep working to the last minute to make sure that we continue to look at everything and provide the best options possible.
And just acknowledge how deeply difficult that level of uncertainty is, especially for families who are trying to figure out what work, life, school, other things all look like this fall.
It is extremely difficult for everyone involved, yes.
Okay. We will move on to the second item in the superintendent update on the open enrollment policy.
All right, so we are not bringing open enrollment policy for a vote or anything today. We are bringing it as a reminder. One of the unique components that occurs due to COVID, it's on page 230 of the board packet that I am focused on, is open enrollment. And we are a district that is an open enrollment district, which currently legally means we have to be open at all times for all students wanting to open enroll. However, COVID provides some additional challenges. And so we need to be ready as a board to be ready to examine and change this policy to perhaps take action on a board meetings notice or even possibly on a special board meetings notice. And so what I mean by that is we are able to accommodate a certain number of students in our classrooms. And if there are people who are wanting to open enroll to the district based on choices, we may run out of space. The only way to tell people that that can't happen, and we don't have that plan at this time, our data doesn't suggest that at this time, and we did not create a plan that suggests that, but we don't know in this time of uncertainty. In Section 4, non-resident student enrollment under the Enrollment Options Program, C, standards, and A and B, and specifically looking at A, but I've highlighted A and B for you. Space is available for the applicant under enrollment cap standards established by the school board or other directive. And what that generally means is that this board could take action to close a grade level, to close a school, or to close the district to open enrolled students. And so I just want the board to be aware that as admin, there are many decisions that we can make, and there are decisions that we cannot make. This is one of those components that we cannot make as administration. Only the board can take that action via policy. And so we would want you to be aware that we may come back, depending on the data and the students that we see during that first week of distance or during those coming weeks, to have that conversation to see if we need you to take action. Again, we do not anticipate it at this time, but we wanted to make sure you're aware of that component of the policy.
Just to ask, so when you say you're not aware of it at this time, so it's fair to say there's no information that you have right now of an influx of open enrollees?
We are having open enrollees in certain grade levels and at certain places at this time. We are not aware of those that we cannot yet accommodate.
Okay, thank you.
Would there any, well, I suppose it's just a wording thing, but would there be a rationale for looking at our 50% capacity numbers? I mean, we've got some numbers we can work with at this point. Is there any rationale for putting something in policy around that? And then how, and I guess we'd have to have it maybe wordsmithed to indicate,
Right, so there's some complexity to that. So right now, for example, we have we'll call it a soft wait list in one of our grades at Richfield Dual Language. So we are making sure that we can fit them into dual language. Now, they are able to come to our district for the grade and go to one of our other 3 elementary schools. So open enrollment is not by school, but it is by district. And so it is sadly extremely complex. We have some rooms that are larger than others, and so they can accommodate more students at half capacity and some fewer students. We obviously have one that teaches in Spanish, and so that provides an additional component where families might not want to open enroll to Richfield looking for Spanish and go to STEM, for example. And so what we are doing is we are plotting out each classroom. We are plotting out the largest classrooms for K2 because those are our in-person classrooms that will have the most students in them. And then we are anticipating, obviously, half the students to be in our 3-5 classrooms. And so we are looking at the spaces, we are measuring. We have had our architects with Mr. Holge draw out diagrams of every classroom to see how many can you fit socially distanced, what is that best practice model. And we are doing that by building, by classroom, by teacher. And so as we go along and as people continue to say, I want hybrid, I want distance, we're going to know exact numbers, but we probably won't know those exact numbers until much later in the game.
Right.
Just to clarify something you'd said there, so if, for example, we had space in second grade in general, we could remain open, but if someone said they were only interested in RDLS, we may have no room for them. And so that we can say that this building or this program does not have space, but we can accommodate you elsewhere.
That is correct. We cannot say you cannot come to Richfield Public Schools, but we can say there is not a physical space right now at...
unless we've closed down second grade.
Correct, unless we being you,
yeah.
close down second grade. Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, this is yet another thing where we will have much more information at our next board meeting. So the next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda containing routine business items. I will pause for just a moment to see if there are any questions or requests before we proceed with a motion to approve.
I will move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Ms. Mishak. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The chair votes aye. The consent agenda is approved. We move into old business, where there are 4 items before us this evening, all of which are existing board policies that we have been reviewing and updating, the first of which is local and out-of-state travel.
Excellent. And I'll just harken back to the consent agenda where Ms. Cassandra Kwan was just named the board secretary, even though she's been acting in that role, and at the rate and position of the past assistant to the superintendent. So we welcome her in that official capacity.
Yes, thank you for taking a moment to that. We're so excited that you're with us.
So it's official. You cannot escape now. All right, local and out-of-state travel. We are pushing this forward for a final read, updated with new MSBA guidelines with very few changes, and then the updated travel reimbursement form, which is a much newer form than had been in the packet previously. Not a huge amount, but I will open it up for questions.
I have a question. I thought I had brought up at a prior meeting the idea that since the expense for school board travel is approved by the superintendent's designee. I had asked if we would be able to add something that would clarify that above some, maybe even just only above a threshold, like if a school board had travel expenses, that it would be a report to the board at the next meeting.
So 3A at the bottom, travel to other meetings for which the member intends to seek reimbursement from the school district should be pre-approved by the school board. And then as approved, but then at the 3C, itinerary submitted for approval to the administrator and superintendent, followed by review of the school board.
Thank you. Right. So the A part isn't enough, wasn't enough because, for example, the national school board meeting could be in Hawaii, in which case we would all want to go. But C, the itinerary must be submitted for approval, followed by review of the school board. I can accept that. Thank you. I have no more questions.
Great. Any additional questions or comments? All right, we could entertain a motion to approve in that case.
So moved.
Second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tenzing and a second by Ms. Malik. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the revised policy is approved. We move next to petty cash.
All right, and so this is also recommended for a final read of the Petty Cash Policy 710 and Guideline 710.1. Again, a very short policy with just a little bit of updated language, and then the Petty Cash Fund, where school names were actually changed to being accurate, and then also we updated the dollar figures to be accurate with current practices and also best business practices.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, we could entertain a motion to approve.
I move approval of policy 710 and guidelines 710.1 as presented.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Ms. Cole. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. The revised policy is approved. Next up is credit card usage.
Credit card usage, okay, policy 712 and 712.1. Again, credit card usage, another very short policy with very few to no updates, and then also credit card usage to update with the P card and common practice. There were a couple questions about credit rating. I will say that having had a P card and checked my credit rating, I noted that the P card is not noted on there. And so there is no notation of the P card. It is not actually associated with an employee outside of identification through our organization. And so we felt pretty comfortable and confident in our review that there is nothing actually tracking the P card to the employee themselves.
I do struggle with that, though, still, having read it again. And I know that Mr. Holge gave us that similar information. But our guidelines and policies usually cover things that are within our control. And we are not in control of the rating agency. If for some reason the bank pieced things together that Steve Winowski's card was this one, and it did show up, we don't have control of that at all. And so it doesn't seem necessary for us to say that as a guideline. We could say it's our intent that it doesn't appear on a credit rating, but we don't control that because we aren't the ratings bureau. And similar, there was another one in there. It can be used anywhere that accepts MasterCard. It can be used anywhere that accepts it, right? If they happen to accept it, we don't necessarily, if a merchant accepts it, I don't know why we would care if they somehow came back and said, oh, well, I usually don't accept MasterCard. But in this case, it can be used anywhere it's accepted, right? It seems strangely narrow.
I think that was added because the P card is a MasterCard.
Sure.
And certainly could be adjusted.
But again, though, that's not it. It's a MasterCard, and I think that someone who holds one of those cards knows that it can be used anywhere that it will be accepted, period.
Sure.
Whatever sticker happens to be on the door and what the point of sale machine accepts or not. And so that was, I don't know, strange to me that we would be so particular on that when it isn't within our control necessarily, unless we want it to be within our control. If an employee had $100 charged to the P card, and we found out that the merchant actually doesn't accept MasterCard, would we reject the charge?
Right. So I guess I'll look for thoughts from the board. So these are guidelines and informative, and so they were verifying in the agreement and in the language, and it generally helps if there is an issue or question. I guess it doesn't.
Okay, so yeah, it might not carry weight or be as important as the policy.
Right. Right.
Okay.
It does not concern me. And part of it is perhaps that I have had business-issued credit cards for many years, and none of those issues have ever come up or been a challenge.
Okay. Can I ask on the unallowable purchases, the sales tax, Minnesota sales tax on most purchases?
Yes.
So do we provide each of the purchasers with the information like a tax exempt letter?
I'm going to call Mr. Holge up to get in the weeds with us. Come on down, Craig.
So when requested, we provide a letter for them to bring to whoever's making the purchases. In most cases, we're asking that they use approved vendors that already have those on file. One of the great things about the P card is because it's set up with a tax exempt account, those things are automatically deducted and pulled off of those as items. If individuals are using their personal credit cards to go and purchase, if they don't have that verification, then they do have to pay that tax exempt or the tax for those pieces. Because they're notified that they shouldn't be using their personal card unless it's approved, and then they're also notified that they need to get that tax number too, so.
Okay. All right, no, thank you. So we, just making sure that we do provide that it's a tax exempt purchase upfront, so that if they happen to be charged sales tax by someone, we weren't saddling the employee with the tax, if it happened to go through.
When the P card is used, they're automatically deducted, but we do provide that notification for them. If somebody goes and makes a purchase, doesn't ask for that tax number, or making it from one of the approved vendors, then they are responsible for that tax because they weren't following the policies. Our auditors don't let us pay taxes, sales taxes where those are in place. Okay. So that's one of the things that they're screening for and why we would deduct that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have no more questions.
Okay. Is anyone prepared to make a motion to approve the revisions?
I'll move the revisions.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Paulus and a second by Ms. Malik. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. The revised policy is approved, and we move to the final old business item, the student transportation policy.
All right, so this is where we are actually asking for a small change. As we presented in our model, and as our survey suggested, we are examining our bus walk zones, and we are examining the best way to ensure that we can have a policy that allows us to get our kids to school while following the policy. And using COVID guidelines. And so we are not looking at a policy change that we expect to be lasting for multiple years. We expect to come back to this policy perhaps even again this year, depending on what happens with COVID, and certainly come back to this to do some further re-examination prior to next school year. As a reminder, Minnesota law requires school districts to transport students to school if they live more than 2 miles from the school. And so as Richfield, we have done secondary at the 2 mile circle, but we have gone with elementary at the 1 mile, and then also have noted hazardous crossings, which means that many of our students are living much closer to school than 1 mile and are also getting transportation. Given COVID and bus capacity, we are functionally not able to do that and abide by the policy and COVID social distancing guidelines. We have set up school patrols and are working in partnership with the city and our Safe Routes to Schools team to make sure that we will have people supporting our students at those hazardous walk zones. And so what we are suggesting is that at this time we remove the statement that talks about hazardous crossing areas, and I'll point to that in a second. And then also, even though it is not in policy, I think since we're talking about student transportation, it's important to continually talk about start times. At past, we had a 7:40 start, an 8:10 start, and an 8:30 start, so a 30-minute route and a 20-minute route. And right now, with COVID, we are only able to do 45-minute routes. And so that would require changing start times. And then similarly, changing between who is on which tier of start time. And so moving Centennial to that first time with STEM at 7:30, 8:15 at RDLS in Sheridan Hills, and 9 o'clock at Richfield Middle and Richfield High School. And this is to make sure that we actually have the buses and the amount of routes, because each school takes a different number of routes. And so while in the past we had bused STEM and RDLS together, it is actually, because of the number of routes, not possible to take our 2 citywide magnets and keep them together, given the requirements of COVID-19. So you'll see in here our proposal in relation to school crossing guards. And then you will also notice on page, and I am struggling to find it exactly at the moment, but has redlined out and gotten rid of, actually it's because it's a clean policy is why I'm not finding it, is removed the page on hazardous crossings, which are now worked into the proposal for providing patrols and crossing guards. With that, I will open it up for questions.
Can I ask, how did we determine which of the elementary schools would move earlier?
What we did is we looked at the number of bus routes that were needed to try to provide, so right now we have 19 drivers available. We have 22 buses available. 19 drivers also would take both the schools, but then also the special ed routes and some of our smaller routes. And so what we did is we compared the number of buses needed to transport in the K2 4 days a week and 3-5 2 days a week model, and paired up, honestly, the only workable math.
And when we talked about bus routes for, say, Sheridan Hills or Centennial or RDLS, was that factoring in the adjustment to radius and hazardous streets? Or was it existing bus routes?
No, these are going to,
So projected bus routes.
Mr. Holge, come on back. And since we won't have to clean that microphone again, since he will be the star of our show from this point forward at that spot of the table. To talk bus routing, Mr. Holge.
Thank you. So our transportation dispatcher did routing based on a variety of different models. We looked at eliminating the hazardous zones, making it all the 1 mile. We looked at 2 mile. We also looked at a 1.5 mile variants and tried to fine tune where those numbers were. Projecting that some of our students would be distance learning, so we pulled off some that we thought would be moving into the distance learning model that we wouldn't be having to provide transportation. So made some assumptions on that, and we're working to clarify that at this point. So yes, it was based on what we were projecting with this route without the hazardous zones when we did those schedule changes.
So we did that switch without, I believe our parent survey did not include anything about start time or significantly about start time, did it?
Nope.
No, so we have no information on how this will be received.
Nope.
Okay. Well, this could be problematic.
Absolutely.
Well, we have some options. We could, what we don't have the option of doing is maintaining the same start time. Okay. So it puts us in a very difficult spot and obviously requires us to communicate this as broadly as possible.
Right.
And as we discussed earlier, this start times are not something that it has been board action. It's being shared here because it is tied to the transportation policy, but start times are not actually what we are voting on this evening.
Correct.
No, start times are not in board policy. That is just trying to say this as many times as
I know
possible.
that. I just want to be clear what we are doing here immediately before us. I think the one thing that I really appreciate is that the boundaries did not change, because that was discussed as an option previously, and I think that was what was very clearly going to be deeply problematic for many if that boundary zone for busing was going to be changed, especially on such short notice. That doesn't mean start times are going to be more popular, but I think we have had a series of difficult trade-offs in trying to figure out how to make our existing bus supply and driver supply work.
Right, so a couple of things. One is it has gone out. We did communicate that out in the previous email that was proposed, and that went out to all families. The option that we would have outside of this would be moving to more tiers. And so essentially, if we don't present a model as such, our next would be to move somebody to 945 and continue expanding upwards. If we were to look at, well, and as we talked about it in a previous meeting, if we looked at not removing hazardous walk zones or bringing everybody in, we would be looking at start times as late as 11 o'clock with 2 tiers for Richfield Middle School. So it is a complex situation.
It is. I mean, I don't think we have any flexibility. Personally, I don't think we have flexibility on changing the radius or the hazardous streets. I just have concern about the thing that's not in the policy. which is which school we seem to be just doing this without any information about impact on the community, and so that troubles me.
And I will add, so we are moving the start time by 30 minutes for Richfield Middle School and Richfield High School. It is moved back by 30. We are moving the RDLS start time by 25 minutes. We are moving the start time of Centennial by 40 minutes, and so we are trying to do that in the best way possible, but yes, we are moving pretty much every start time by between.
Yeah. No, I know, and there's aspects of that are hard. It's just people pick the schools, I suppose, sometimes based on start time and the one that fits them. For example, my child did not go to STEM or RDLS because there was no way she was going to wake up in time for the 6:55 walk to the bus stop for the 7 o'clock pickup. So we were at Sheridan Hills, and fortunately for her, Sheridan Hills was then the third of our tiers. And by the time she got to the middle school, that was now the third of our tiers. So she's really lived well at sleeping in. And I struggled, there could be the school that was like hers was Centennial, so it moved to our middle tier, and now we're moving it back. And so I know it's temporary. I know it's, I assume it's temporary. It doesn't have to be. But it's just, it's a challenge. And so we don't have information on start time impact from the community. And so that's okay. That doesn't mean I don't support the policy, because who are we kidding? We need the policy change. We cannot manufacture buses, and even if we could, we cannot manufacture drivers.
So, following up on your thought, is there a concern that we may have parents that want to switch schools for their children based on this start time change?
We don't necessarily believe so, because Centennial had been an earlier start time previously. Had been, to the best of my recollection, they had been 7:40 at one point.
But not for any of the parents that currently
Sure.
have kids in that building. Right?
The additional component is we have the Beacons program there, which provides after-school childcare for them. So it is certainly possible we have people who want or need to switch schools based on start times. That is something we would try to work to accommodate.
I might recommend that we come back to start times in a future meeting once we have some more information. I am glad that it has actually been shared with families already. I think it would be helpful for us to know, what are we hearing back? Are there actually enrollment changes that we think or know are directly tied to start time changes?
Okay.
I just had a technical question on the hazardous crossing. Is that something that is defined in statute, or is that just something that we get to sort of decide for ourselves?
That is something decided for ourselves. So if you think of Sheridan Hills, for example, kids, they are 3 blocks from 66th, which is in Penn. Sorry, they're 3 blocks from Penn, which is obviously a hazardous crossing. And so we have chosen to bus across there. So if you live 3 blocks to the east of Penn, or east of the school that is across Penn, you would get a bus. Now we will use a school patrol. But those are our decisions.
And do I remember correctly that in part of revising this, one of the things that was learned is actually many districts do not have hazardous crossings in their policy?
Districts similarly situated, and they don't have hazardous crossways identified. So we were one of the few districts that still had that identified just in the general area.
So I know last summer I heard some community feedback with frustrations of what our radius was. So I anticipate by expanding, there will be more frustrations along with, what we all are dealing with.
We are not expanding.
You're not?
No.
No, so we are staying at the 1 mile radius, but the hazardous crossings go away, and students will then get patrol support to go across the street.
I retract that. I misread the first paragraph.
Yeah, but
that is great news. Well done.
But I would tell you, functionally, this serves the same way. If you live 4 blocks to the east, then you have to cross Penn. So if you live on Oliver and are right across from Sheridan, 4 blocks away, you could have caught a bus before.
Yeah, so so it's a net decrease in
Right, there are
bus
440
ridership.
students that lose transportation option based on this.
So there may be some folks who are.
So my question, I guess, would still remain then in this case. What factors might have us consider changing the policy back to include that. Would it be COVID numbers? Would it be, we're going to commit to this for the school year?
So I think COVID
Regardless.
numbers and the numbers of students in school is
Okay.
why we needed to make this decision.
Okay, so potentially, if something shifted, we might reevaluate this policy this school year.
Yes, if we were able to move to in-person, we can certainly go back to that. And we could also have a larger conversation about start times again, honestly, for next year, because we probably won't have the level of transportation, hopefully, let me say, hopefully we'll not have the level of transportation requirements that we have right now.
The only other thing I would say, just because it feels important, is it also could enable us to have a conversation about having the boundaries become even smaller. If we are able to realize actually taking the hazardous routes out ended up not being of a significant impact, does that and do other changes enable us to have the conversation that many of us have said over the years we would like to have, but has been financially kind of prohibitive for us to think about actually bringing those zones even closer in.
I did get a text from our communication director who has gotten multiple emails about start time, and the biggest question people have actually had is when is the end time of schools?
Sure.
And so just reminding, and we will be clear in our next communication to go out, that we are looking at still maintaining a 6.5-hour school day and keeping the same school day of 6 hours and 50 minutes at the high school and the middle school. And so we're planning to maintain those same days, same time.
Any final questions or comments about the proposed student transportation policy changes? Okay. Is anyone willing to make a motion to approve?
I will move that we approve the transportation policy as amended.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tensing and a second by Ms. Malik. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the revised policy is approved. We move into new business items before us related to both policy and facilities work. The first item is review of policies that are required to be approved annually by the board, but have no substantive edits from previous years. So Superintendent Yanowski, I'll let you do a brief review of how we're going to handle this.
Correct. So a new process recommended to us by Board Secretary Cassandra Quam. We have a set of mandated policies to review. These should be looked at yearly by the board. And as you have read the board packet in advance, you have reviewed the policies. There are a set of them today that have no changes or no substantial change in terms of statutory changes since the last time we reviewed them. And then there are some that we will review later on during this calendar year that are mandated that have some larger changes. And so we're looking at the mandated reporting of maltreatment in vulnerable adults and how one is required to report that in the process that goes about. The mandated reporting of child neglect or physical or sexual abuse. Minor changes, not substantial at all, and just a couple of very small wording changes. Mandated reporting guidelines have no edits. Student sex non-discrimination also has no edits. And then our overall student behavior policy and guidelines, which were just recently redone in connection with our students, and neither of those have edits. So the role of the board, and then noted as reviewed, is just to have reviewed them and then ideally move those forward.
And just to confirm, the superintendent and I discussed, and we can actually approve these in one slate of policies, so we do not need to take them one by one. Are there any comments or questions, however, before we would entertain that motion?
I think for our viewers to clarify what is it that we're doing, why we're like skipping and grouping policies that don't sound like they're together. So this is our homework for this packet review that we start reviewing since, when we get the packet the week before, that we reviewed these policies to ensure that they're still within the law, the recommendations, and that's why we are saying we did our homework and that we reviewed it. So
Yes, and Cassandra did a lot of homework for us before it even came to us to ensure all of those legal pieces are in place. Yes, thank you.
Correct. And unlike our other policies, which we do 3 reads, these have no changes, and we're actually required to just review them on a yearly basis. The other ones that have changes, those will come back in a slower process than this.
I would just comment a thank you to Cassandra for helping us streamline this process.
Yeah.
We do a lot of policy review. It's very much appreciated.
Is anyone prepared to make a motion to approve the slate of policy?
I will move that we approve the mandatory policy review as presented.
I will second.
Great. So we have a motion by Ms. Malik, a second by Mr. Tensing. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the policies are approved. So we turn now to several facilities change orders across the district. So Craig Holge is going to do an overview of the orders, and then we will approve them building by building.
Perfect, thank you. So the first series is Centennial Facilities Project Change Order Number 9 for a total of $18,648.19. This has to do with some additional demolition work and some infill associated with some walls. Also includes a credit from a previous PR. New total on that is $897,614.74. Then we have change orders 5 through 10 for Sheridan Hills. Total of $184,779. $13,989 for some adjustments to aluminum plates and new front door entry additions, some cinder block demolition and infills associated with that. Another change order number 6 for $22,584 for some mechanical work. Change order number 7, $40,664 for some demolition of the exterior walls and new ventilator openings. Change order number 8, $27,435 for modifications and revisions to the toilet room layout and added plumbing. Change order 9, $4,894 for costs associated with some electrical revisions and added demo associated with that. And then change order number 10 for $75,213,000 for some changes within the boiler room plant in that area. Total, again, $184,779 for a total new project of $9,808,223. Moving on to Richfield STEM Facilities Project number 24, net increase of $18,894.07 for mechanical changes related to existing conditions and some piping along with computer room coiling units and some ceiling modifications and acoustic panels. Total of that now is at $15,400,158.42. Richfield Middle School, we have change order number 3 for $6,036.95 for additional drywall and plaster scope modifications to align existing walls, window sills, and soffits. Total project at $16,702,966.45. And Richfield High School, change orders 27, 28, 29, and 30 for a total of $471,566. The largest of that is $239,434.34 for electrical items associated with the repair and replacement of a buried electrical feeder that was damaged. One of the challenges here, it was not on any of our plans. It did not locate in any of the locations because it was so far underground that's really the heart of where that fell in place. Change order number 28, $128,390.62 for ceiling modifications, added soffits and room layouts, and then also some revisions to the gym striping plan and additional floor and wall patching. Change order number 29, $49,195.68 for various architectural modifications regarding door hardware, window sills, and some insulation piping that had to be replaced. And finally, change order 30 for $54,545.36 for temporary heat for the south gym when the mechanical units had been removed to maintain that area and stuff like that, as well as some additional fire dampers, ductwork modifications, and an additional dryer vent that was added to the lower level. That project now is at $37,162,637.19. So with that, we ask for your approval and can answer any questions if you have those.
Great. We will start with any comments or questions about any of these facilities change orders as just overviewed.
I did have a question on the high school one, just to, if you could speak some more on the damaged electrical feeder. That was you mentioned somewhere in the courtyard, is that correct?
Yep.
Now, we had another one of those near the flagpole entrance earlier.
This, I
in the
believe, is
project.
the same one. So this is the big one that we've been dealing with kind of back and forth. So part of the process is they work on what is the total cost, kind of negotiate that back and forth with the architects, with ICS, with the contractor and things like that. So this happened, I want to say it was about almost a year ago at this point, where they were working on some of that area. It was actually when they were putting in the helical piers, I think. So what's basically holding up much of that new entry that went into the courtyard area. So it's probably that
related.
same one.
It's
It's that first
related.
large
Okay.
substantial one that was hit big that was, as it said, 20 feet below. Nothing showed where it was going, so they had to investigate where it was, do temporary replacements for it, added replacements. Turned out it was wrapped in asbestos. So there was an asbestos abatement a part of that same part of the project.
It was.
Wrapped in asbestos.
What else would it be?
Phrase I always
Well,
wanted.
And like they said, I don't know why you put asbestos around something that's
20
so far
feet
underground,
underground,
but they did at that time, and so that's what happened. So it was like one of those series of things that just kept piling on with more issues that could have happened within that area, so.
I suppose, I guess it's fair to say that as we make changes to the plant and new structures and wires and things put in, we've documented them better than they have in the distant past.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's a good, straightforward answer. Any other questions? Okay, we will take these one by one. First up is Centennial Change Order number 9.
I will move approval of Centennial Change Order number 9.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Ms. Mishak. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. The change order is approved. Next is Sheridan Hills Elementary Change Orders 5 through 10.
I move to approve Sheridan Hills Elementary Change Orders 5 through 10 as presented.
I will second.
So we have a motion by Ms. Mishak and a second by Mr. Tensing. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. The change orders are approved. Next is Richfield STEM School Change Order number 24.
I'll move the change order number 24 as presented.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Paulus and a second by Ms. Malik. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. The change order is approved. We have Richfield Middle School Change Order number 3.
I will move the change order for Richfield Middle School as presented.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tensing and a second by Mr. Paulus. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. The change order is approved. And last but not least, we have Richfield High School Change Orders 27 through 30.
I move approval of Richfield High School Change Orders 27 through 30 as presented.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Ms. Malik and a second by Ms. Cole. Any final discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. The change orders are approved. Last but certainly not least, in the new business section of the agenda, we are thrilled to recognize the annual donation from the Richfield Spartan Foundation. Superintendent Yanowski.
Yes, and we are proud to serve as intermediaries to these students' college accounts, and so it's recommended to accept the following donations with gratitude as a special donation of the Richfield High School Scholarship Fund received on August 10th, 2020, in the amount of $24,000 from Richfield Spartan Foundation, funding $1,000 scholarships for the following 24 high school graduates. And if I am incorrect in the name pronunciation, I did practice, but we will see how good I do.
Let me see.
Athena Award, Hannah Hintermeister. Top scholars, Caleb Nolenberger and Madeline Gibbs. Against all odds scholarships, Luke Ott, Molly Stark, Ifra Ibrahim, Catherine Vasquez, Guadalupe Galeno Rodriguez, Joel Sofia Poyatos, Destiny Smith Partridge, Julio Tapia Hernandez, Catherine Meissen, Ruben Augustin Quevedo, Sumaya Mohammed, Ahmed, Lindsay Franco Nicholas. Then Athletics Academic Excellence and Leadership, Anna Jensen, Annalise Pierce, Clara Liebeck, Karina Hartman, and Taylor Eckerman. The Desmond Family Scholarship, Yogita Manikaran. Russ Schuweiler Memorial Scholarship, Alexandra Medvec and Vashti Sanachara. And then attached, you'll see the letter, but more interestingly, you'll see the handoff of the check in our gymnasium, and underneath is the new gym floor, which was just put in and is continuing to be finalized. And so the first glimpse at the new gym floor within our building.
Fantastic.
I can't see the floor because I'm struck by how large Bill Davis is. He's a solidly built man, and a really wonderful person. If you ever have the chance to talk to Bill, he is the greatest.
He is a lovely man.
He really is.
And yes, even if he has shrunk in his age, that just
Yeah.
means he was all the more large in stature.
I imagine,
I was
yeah.
looking up to him both literally and figuratively.
Right.
So I will move that we accept these donations with gratitude.
I'll second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tenzing and a second by Ms. Malik. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. The donations are certainly accepted with deep gratitude, and especially on behalf of the graduating seniors of 2020 who benefited from these scholarships. We next move into the advanced planning section of the agenda, beginning with the legislative update. So I will look to Superintendent Yunowski and Board Member Peter Tenzing to see if there is anything you would like to share here in addition to the lengthy conversation we have already had about fall planning.
Just a couple of brief updates. Obviously, the governor extended the emergency order since our last board meeting. However, we are obviously meeting in person, as we are anticipating that at our next board meeting, we'll also begin to have students and staff coming in person. And so we are modeling and leading the way of social distancing, masking, and some of those legislative requirements. And then additionally, there is CARES funding allocated out to districts to help support some of these components that are added on. So we are thankful to the state and federal governments for funding and supports through the CARES Act to support the needs of districts in the times of COVID.
Yeah, I don't have anything really dramatic to add that hasn't really been touched on already. Much of the AMSD meeting was relative to sort of guide how to interact and work with MD and MDH to kind of get your hybrid model going and do your in-person component. And the legislature has not been terribly active of late, even with some special sessions. It's been not a whole lot on the K-12 front.
Thank you. We'll transition to information and/or questions from the board that people would like to share with one another or with the public.
One thing that, and this again comes from AMSD, but I think that I would like to put in a plug for the website mnvotes.org. Obviously, we know that this general election coming up is going to be a really unique experience. And mnvotes.org is the website run by the Secretary of State, where you can get information about all the different ways that you can vote in this upcoming election. And obviously, participating in the democratic process is not only our great privilege, but our responsibility. So the other piece that may be of interest is Secretary of State Simon did comment on the challenge that his department may experience getting poll workers or election judges. And this could be an opportunity for some of our high school students. If you're 16 and older, I see Dr. Daniels nodding. I know that they've done that in the past, and there may be an opportunity this year.
I served as a poll worker last Tuesday on the primary day. I figured it was another way I could put my COVID-19 antibodies to good use and hopefully keep some of our more vulnerable poll workers safely at home. It was a great experience, and this is especially important for any high school students who are thinking about it. It is a paid opportunity.
Correct.
Which was news to me. Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up.
Yes.
And I believe, I'll add, I believe that some of the polling places have changed from last year. So just a reminder to check. I know mine didn't, but I know some did. So some of our
Especially those in schools. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, anything else? All right, Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, September 8th at 7 o'clock p.m. in light of the Labor Day holiday on Monday. After that, we'll meet again on Monday, September 17th, with time at the beginning of the meeting for public comment. Oh, thank you. Good catch. Monday, September 21st. Not really sure where the 17th came from. That's probably today. Yep. That feels about right. Are there any items board members would like to request for discussion on an upcoming agenda? Okay, the next item of business is to move into closed session for the purposes of labor negotiation strategy as allowed by Minnesota Statute 13D.03. Before we entertain a motion to do that, just want to note that the meeting feed is going to stop at this time. The only thing that we will do after the board concludes the closed session is adjourn. So just want people watching to know that there will be no further action or discussion that is public after this time. Do we have a motion to move into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Paulus and a second by Ms. Malik. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye. We will move into closed session at 9:26 p.m. and we'll come back together after a brief recess to clear the room. Thank you.